But first, there's a saying in politics that things are rarely as bad or as good as they might seem. And it's true. Almost no defeat and almost no victory is ever final. But this Brexit fiasco, well, it's about as bad as it gets. One of the world's great countries can't decide whether it's in or out of the European Union, whether it accepts or rejects the democratic vote to leave, and whether it can or it cannot work out a credible way forward. This whole shambles shows what happens when the people in charge don't believe in what they are supposedly trying to do. The British people voted to leave the European Union because, on a 52 to 48% result, they didn't like the Eurocrats in Brussels calling the shots over Britain's trade, Britain's immigration and Britain's economic regulation. And quite rightly, they expected their politicians would then work out a credible plan for a Britain that was, once more, fully self-governing and fully free to work out its own place in the wider world. The basic problem is that no serious person in the British government or the British Parliament has put up a credible vision for what a free Britain would look like. It shouldn't have been this hard. With Britain entirely in charge of everything, all it had to do was decide the kind of future relationship that it wanted with the EU and offer it to them on a take-it-or-leave-it basis, given that Europe has always needed Britain far more than Britain has needed Europe. It really should have been pretty straightforward, given that all trade between Britain and Europe is fully free of tariffs and quotas, and pretty much all economic activity in Britain and Europe is now happening under the same rules. The obvious way forward would have been a British declaration that all existing European rules would apply in Britain until they were changed, but that no future ones made on the continent would apply unless adopted, and that no future decision of any European tribunal would apply in the UK unless it was specifically adopted by a British one. The offer could have been something like this. Trade with the EU would be entirely free of tariffs and quotas, and there would be full mutual recognition of credentials and standards. There would be the free movement of people for work at high wages, but not for welfare. And all European citizens currently resident in Britain would be welcome to stay indefinitely and perhaps even apply for UK citizenship. And the ask would have been exactly the same the other way for Brits in Europe. And so-called divorce payments, well, none. Not a dollar, not a euro, not a pound, except for shared costs of ongoing joint projects. And with Britain unilaterally proposing free movement of goods with Europe, there would be no need for a hard border with Ireland unless the EU tried to make the Irish have one, and that then would be a problem for the Irish to resolve, not Britain. Back in January last year, British Prime Minister Theresa May famously stated that no deal is better than a bad deal. Well, only if she'd subsequently lived up to that solemn declaration. The problem thus far is that a bad deal, a very bad deal, has been the only one the EU has been prepared to offer. Basically, Britain has to accept remaining in a single market forever without any further say over the single market's rules. And May, along with much of the UK establishment, has been so terrified of leaving without a deal that she's been prepared to swallow this humiliation. Two things now are obvious. First, Britain should urgently prepare for a no-deal Brexit. If the EU wants to punish Britain, there will be some disruption, but people will cope. Britain has coped with far worse than a bit of delay at customs. And second, the Conservative Party needs to find itself a new leader. For months, PM May has been saying that the Parliament must decide. Now she wants the parliamentary vote put off, so it's her deal or chaos. No leader should ever present people with an unacceptable choice, least of all a British leader, given the British tradition of standing up to continental Europe rather than giving in to it. Britain will recover from this, but only with a leader who treats her country and her party with more respect. And of course, it goes without saying that renewed talk of a second referendum is just what the Remainers, or I should say the Remoaners, it's only what they want to keep people voting until the establishment gets the result it wants. Let's hope the people of Britain are a wake-up to what's really going on.
There is a deal that she can sell?
All looks a bit desperate, doesn't it? I mean, going along and begging. I mean, why on earth did we ever agree to a set of negotiating terms whereby we would have to meet their three demands before they would come to us and talk about trade? So from the start, we've been in trouble. I would say it's rather like the UK's a mouse and the EU's a cat. They're playing with us. What I am certain of is that here in Brussels, they don't want a deal. They want to string this out for as long as possible. They're now even intervening in British politics by treating Jeremy Corbyn here yesterday as if he was some sort of rock star. The only hope, and there is one hope, I think, and that comes in the shape of Mrs. Merkel. There's big pressure now coming on Mrs. Merkel from German industry. You know, they have a 30 billion trade surplus with the United Kingdom every single year, and a lot of German companies are saying, for goodness sake, you know, break this deadlock. And if Mrs. Merkel says the time has come to move on and talk about trade.
Well, she did say things were sounding a lot more hopeful.
As I say, she's the one person that could break the deadlock.
Why do you say they don't want a deal here in Brussels?
Oh, because the political imperative here is that no country can be allowed to leave this union without being seen to be punished. And that matters more to them than jobs and growth.
But are you just talking about Brussels bureaucrats?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, you're not talking about the national members of the European Union.
No, absolutely not. And look, in the last week, we've seen the Hungarian finance minister, we've seen the Danish finance minister. There are now voices around Europe saying, come on, let's move on and have sensible negotiations. The blocker is Brussels itself.
And you, as the man who led the Take Back Control Brexit campaign, do you want a deal? Do you want an agreement?
Look, of course, a sensible free trade arrangement is in all of our interests. Of course I want that. But what I don't want is to lose years and years and years negotiating, having transition deals, and effectively closing ourselves off from other trade opportunities with the 85% of the world economy that's not in the Eurozone.
And do you accept, too, that Britain does have obligations, if you like, a divorce bill? I mean, they've got your pension to pay for.
Oh, well, that's easy. That's easy. The pension bill's easy. There are 22,000 British people, nearly all European Commission employees and a couple of hundred MEPs. And what you do is you take those pension liabilities off the European Union's books and deal with that at home, because that makes it a nice, clean settlement. We do owe money up until 2020 because we signed up for a 7-year spending framework, and we should absolutely honour that because we agreed to it. Against that, we've got billions invested in the European Investment Bank. One nets off against the other. Let's just call it quits.
So you don't agree with spending even 20 billion, as Mrs. May
No, I don't. There's absolutely no need to. You know, the treaty is very clear that once we've left, we have no further obligations. I do accept on pensions there's a liability, which is why I say let's take that off the EU's books.
But if it comes to it, and clearly what they're disagreeing with at the moment is the level of payment, would it be a disaster if, in order to have a clean break, if you like, Britain does end up paying 30, 40, 50 billion?
Quite frankly, honestly, the thought of Britain having to pay 40 billion sterling to leave this place, I mean, it's akin to blackmail. We should have no part of it.
Now, you say they're treating Jeremy Corbyn like a rock star. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, they told us we couldn't negotiate with the other 27, and in turn, they shouldn't be negotiating with the SNP or Jeremy Corbyn, but they are. If they could sow political...
I mean, he just came here as a leader of a socialist party.
No. He was treated as if he was a monarch, you know. I mean, it was remarkable. They would love to sow division in British politics. They would, frankly, they would love Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister, because Labour's position now is they will accept any deal.
What about no deal? We're hearing David Davis is going to present on Halloween an optimistic scenario. What do you think the consequences of no deal would be?
Well, clearly borders, clearly how you measure customs, tariffs, things like that, which would come into play. So we've got to find technical ways around that. Beyond that, no deal means we can start doing business with the rest of the world. I'm not frightened of no deal, but I'd much rather we had a grown-up free trade agreement.
I mean, you know, having been here in the European Parliament for so long, that actually our trade with Europe is pretty important, isn't it? We don't just want to walk away from that.
Look, of course it's important, but the rest of the world's important too. You know, Brexit was about giving us the opportunity to be a genuine global player. Now, if they don't want to come to a sensible accommodation, then we'll reach a point by December where the Prime Minister will have to say, here is a deadline, and if you do not come to us with sensible trade, at that point, we simply are leaving. So if David Davis is making the right contingency plans, that will strengthen our hand.
I mean, Brexit, as you made clear with that famous poster, was also to a certain extent about immigration.
Yes.
Now, the only bit of immigration that our relations with Europe directly controls is immigration from within the European Union. That, again, is an unresolved issue of the nature of European Union citizens. Do you think that we need to mutually guarantee each other's rights?
Oh, look, I think that for the 3.5 million EU citizens living in the United Kingdom, they all came legally. We may have accepted too many, but they all came legally, and of course their rights should be guaranteed. But we cannot have the European Court of Justice giving them superior rights.
That does mean that I think there are 3 million European citizens in the UK. There are only 1 million,
if that,
UK citizens in Europe. So that means accepting a substantial permanent population of European foreigners, doesn't it?
I don't think we can change that because, you know, for a country to retrospectively...
What should we change it ideally, do you think?
Well, I don't believe in retrospectively changing law. All of those people who came from Romania or Poland or wherever it was...
Or France.
Yeah, all France. But they all came legally. So, no, I'm not for turning the clock back. We accept where we are, but we move on to a different basis hereafter.
And hereafter, do we say effectively that Britain's doors are closed to Europeans?
Not closed, no. We're quite happy to give people work permits. You know, if people want to come and give us their skills and we can use them, that's fine. What we don't do is give people an automatic right to residence.
Now, you used to work in the City of London. How do you feel when you hear the head of Goldman Sachs going to Frankfurt and saying he's going to be spending a lot more time
I've never heard such nonsense in all my life. Frankfurt is number 11 in terms of the most desirable financial locations to be in, and London is number 1. And hopefully it'll stay at number 1.
It's not going to, with companies like Goldman Sachs, shift a lot of work.
Goldman Sachs are playing a big political game. You know, they love the European Union. For the first time in their history, they can actually write the rule book for their own industry to keep medium-sized competitors out. We should not be held hostage by Goldman Sachs.
As a veteran of Europe, which maybe not how you like to describe yourself, but it's a fact, what do you reckon, deal or no deal at the end of this?
It feels to me that no deal is more likely than a deal, but I repeat the point, the one hope is that Mrs. Merkel says, right, let's grow up, let's start talking about trade.